welcome to this week's episode of the Goodrum Show with me, Chris Goodrum. Or should I say, Yati da boyo. Yes, indeed, we are in Wales this weekend. Well, not literally, but in spirit, nevertheless. And why the Penderyn Distillery? Well, I mean, the Penderyn Distillery, I like that. We have history, and one's history with Wales doesn't just actually sort of relate to the relationship, I suppose, for want of a better word, that I have with the distillery. You may not actually know this, but indeed in my own personal lineage, should we say, I am indeed partially Welsh. Yeah, but you didn't know that one, did you? Anyway, which brings me neatly on to the title page for today's episode of the show. You're probably wondering just what the hell's all that about. Well, there is a story. There always is, isn't there? Anyway, so basically, going back to my grandparents on my mother's side of the family, sometime in the 1930s, they emigrated from northern Italy to South Wales, and once I arrived in South Wales, they opened a fish and chip shop, like you do. And the pictures that you see in the title page were taken when I was about 5 or 6 months old at my grandparents' fish and chip shop in Porth, no less. And as you can see from the other one, I might not have had much of an appreciation of whiskey at the time, but I certainly appreciated ice cream. So there you go, a little bit of my own personal history for your gratification, I suppose. But anyway, so going back to the tale, like I said, me and the Penderyn Distillery are like that, shall we say. Basically, my mother used to sort of visit family and relatives in South Wales pretty much once a year at least. And this one particular year, I think it was 2003, 2004, she didn't manage to do so. And whenever she went down to Wales, she'd always buy a bottle of this Merlin cream liqueur, which was produced by the Penderyn Distillery. And so this one particular year, she sort of phoned me up and said, could I get hold of a bottle for her? She hadn't been able to get down to Wales. And I said, sure, yeah, okay, no problem. So I phoned up the distillery, ordered the case, and I was having a chat with the lady on the phone, and she said, do you realise that that we're releasing a whiskey on St David's Day? This was obviously back in 2004. And I said, well, no, okay. And I guess at the time I didn't quite really have the gravitas to sort of like say, oh, send me a sample before I consider stocking it. And I just said, yeah, okay, I'll have 6. And she said, okay, well, we'll put you down for 6 cases then. I went, oh, dear God, no. 6 cases of an unknown quantity. Couldn't do that. Well, I wish I bloody well had, to be honest with you, because it was when it was released, pretty much Tesco's in South Wales bought the whole lot, and we were the only shop outside of South Wales that actually had any stock. And I was getting phone calls and emails and all sorts, from Welsh people all over the world, in actual fact, wanting to buy a bottle. And well, I only had 6, and the reality of the situation was I could have sold all 36. But anyway, that's hindsight for you, I suppose. I mean, we did sell a number of the first bottling they did, not the Millennium cask, which was the very first cask distilled, which I believe was bottled for those that had sort of taken up their initial offer, should we say, of putting money into the distillery. But the first bottling, other than the 46% Madeira finish, was I believe a cask strength bottling. I don't know if it was a single cask or not. It came in a nice wooden box, and we sold a fair few of them. They were quite well, relatively well priced at the time, and I think they're damn sight more expensive these days. But anyway, so there you go. That's kind of my history with the distillery. And the reason for today's episode for the show, apart from obviously giving you that interesting piece of information about my dealings with the distillery, is a new release, or a couple of new releases. Well, one fairly new release. Basically, the distillery has a range that they call Icons of Wales, and they feature sort of icons of Wales, funnily enough. People like Dylan Thomas and Gareth Edwards and what have you. And I've not really paid a great deal of attention to it. I guess, these particular bottlings don't really have a great deal of resonance outside of Wales to a certain extent. Well, not for me anyway. Apart from this one, which is the latest release in the Icons of Wales series, which is called, as you can see, the Royal Welsh Whisky. Now, apparently, many years ago, there was a distillery in Wales, and you'll have to excuse my pronunciation of this, Frongoch, I believe is the name of the distillery, and they produced this particular bottling, and there doesn't appear to be very many of them about. I think the distillery has got one, and certainly I know the Whisky Exchange has actually got one on its website for £6,000. So for this particular Icons of Wales bottling, they decided they were going to attempt to recreate this particular whisky, and I'm guessing they must have sampled a little bit and decided that, although they didn't know the exact peating levels and the exact sort of barley and production method and all that, they probably had a good stab at sort of creating something that was similar. Now, as I haven't had the opportunity, and probably never will have the opportunity to taste the original, I couldn't say how close they were to it, but we will obviously get on to tasting that in due course. The other relatively new release is the 46% bottling of the Rich Oak. You may well remember from the last episode that I did on the distillery, I did the single cask bottling that they produced, which was absolutely stunning, so kind of quite looking forward to that. And before we get on to the range, I must mention the new bottle that the distiller has come up with. I mean, this is, look at this, I mean, this is incredibly hoopy, isn't it? I mean, looks like something like Dan Dare's rocket ship or something out of Fritz Lang's Metropolis. I mean, with these fins and what have you. I mean, this is really quite a stunning looking bottle, it has to be said. So, but of course, obviously, frippery and bottle shapes and labels and all that is absolutely meaningless unless the juice is good. So we shall find out when we get around to tasting it. So anyway, I think I've kind of waffled enough about stuff. Probably best get on and well, introduce the lineup. Right, okay, so as I've said, the real reason for this week's episode of the show is these two bottlings, but I thought it would be nice to go back and visit the core range, because it's been a number of years since I've done that. Before I do though, I would say, love to say a big thank you to the distillery who kindly sent me the samples. I mean, I got in touch with them and said, can you send me samples, expecting little bottles, and lo and behold, full-size things turn up. So the generosity of the distillery is very good and very appreciated. So, but obviously these bottles are obviously miniatures that come in the little miniature gift pack that they do. I'm guessing these were bottled probably last year, considering I bought a load just before Christmas, but there's obviously no indication on the bottles when they were actually bottled. But anyway, we're going to kick off with the classic bottling. This is the Madeira finish, so initially aged in ex-American oak casks, finished for a period of time which I don't know in ex-Madeira. Originally, I guess, because obviously, as you well know, the still that the distillery has is this kind of hybrid pot column still, and I think initially they decided that they wanted to create a fairly light, delicate, elegant spirit that would obviously lend itself to being bottled relatively young. But obviously, by finishing it in the Madeira cask, it just gave it a little bit more weight, a little bit more sort of depth and intensity, and just kind of rounded it out. And I'd often would have liked to have seen, as the distillery built up stocks, older spirit being used in that, but it seems to me that they've obviously decided to keep the style of this pretty much the same as has always been. So I'm guessing relatively young spirit, 3, maybe 4, possibly 5, going into that. But anyway, we shall obviously find out. The second bottle we'll be looking at, of course, is the Rich Oak, so bottle at 46%. I believe a vatting, and this is one of the things I love about the Penderyn distillery, is that although obviously the standard bottling is finished, so pretty much most of their other bottlings are vattings of ex-American oak, and in this case ex-European casks. So bottle of 46%, and obviously quite dark in colour, so it'll be interesting to see how that is, because I remember, like I said, the cask strength, I think it was a single cask bottling, was exceptionally good. So the third bottling we'll be looking at is the Sherrywood. Now again, one of the things I like about this is it's not a finish, it is, you know, a vatting of ex-American oak and ex-Oloroso. So, you know, the master blender at the distillery can obviously sort of, you know, get the recipe right, so it's not overloaded with sherry. And I think this is all actually well known. I think that is the way to play around with sherry casks, shall we say. You certainly have a lot more control over the amount of sherry that actually sort of goes into your finished product. So I think, yeah, I'm looking forward to tasting that, as it's been a while. The next bottling we're looking at is their peated. Now, as I may have mentioned before, the barley itself isn't actually peated. Again, it is a vatting of their standard spirit aged in ex-American oak and ex-peated casks, which I believe the majority tend to come from Laphroaig, I think. And so again, you get a nice kind of balance. It's not going to be sort of OTT on the peat. It's, you know, going to be, again, balanced, and I'm again looking forward to tasting that. And the final one we'll be looking at, of course, is this one, the Royal Welsh. Now, interestingly enough, this is a vatting. It's a vatting of their peated whiskey, which is obviously a vatting, American oak and peated. So they take some of that and then they vat it together with some portwood whiskey, which they produce. And of course the portwood is absolutely fabulous. But again, I'm guessing, although I don't know exactly, because I haven't done my research on that one, because it's not included in today's episode of the show, but I would imagine, again, it is a vatting of American oak and portwood, and you know, the balance is just really quite pleasant. And so I'm kind of really looking forward to this, because it's different. I mean, I always thought that the Icons of Wales series, and I could well be wrong here, were just basically the standard Madeira finished stuff, just with different labels on, shall we say. But when I read about this particular bottling, I thought, well, this sounds really interesting, you know, the peated and the portwood. So anyway, that's this week's lineup. Let's kick off with the Madeira finish then, shall we? Right, okay, so let's see what the nose gives us on this end, shall we? Light, fresh, barleyed, crisp, green apple, barley, touch of vanilla, but it's got a lovely weightiness to it. The Madeira gives it that sort of slightly biscuity, slightly rich undertone, and this is one of the things I've always loved about the Welsh whiskey. It's just got a really lovely balance. It's got that lightness, that sort of almost lowlandy kind of character, really sort of barley led, and again harmonious touch of earth coming through on the finish, late on the nose, I should say. Yeah, I like this. It's an easygoing whiskey, you know. See what it smells like. Opens up with a little bit more oak, a little bit more toffee, vanilla, and a bit more of the sort of winey, biscuity Madeira. Then in comes the spirit. It's coming in with a little bit of freshness, green apples, barley, touch of citrus, a little bit of white fruit as well. Quite a minerally finish, quite not totally austere, because the Madeira seems to sort of sit beneath and kind of just continue right throughout the progression of the whiskey, and so it kind of gives it a nice foundation. There's a little bit of honey as well on the aftertaste, but it finishes really clean, really fresh, and yeah, I love that. I mean, it's got freshness, depth, you know, and is still very, very impressive. I mean, the bottlings do vary obviously from time to time. This actually does taste like it's got a reasonable amount of age. In actual fact, I can often remember some of the earlier bottlings tending to have that little bit of rose petally kind of note, and were a little bit almost astringent, but that's got a lovely kind of character, and it certainly feels that to me that the spirit is maybe a little bit older than it used to be, but that's just a guess on my part. Right, okay, so, incidentally, they're all bottled at 46%, apart from obviously the Royal Welsh, which is bottled at 43. Just thought I would mention that. Anyway, so let's move on to the Rich Oak. Let's see what the nose gives us on this end, shall we? Rich, yeah, rich, oaky, but it's not overly oaked. I mean, that's obviously the emphasis here. It's got that sort of taut vanilla, quite sort of tight tannins as well. It's got a sort of kind of an almost French oak character. I don't know whether I mean, it's European oak, so I don't know whether it's Spanish or French, but it certainly has to me it has that kind of French oak kind of feeling, that kind of taut tannins, and a sort of an almost kind of spicy tannin kind of character, you know, gritty but soft. It's got a lot of vanilla, there's some barley, touch of citrus, a little bit of earth. I mean, I like that. I mean, again, you know, the oak is obviously centre stage here, but it's not overly oaked, it's not blasted with oak. There is spirit character, there's elegance. I really like this. I mean, it's got that, like I say, that lovely kind of taut, grippy kind of tannin to it, but plenty of sort of rich fruits and vanilla to sort of add the balance. So let's see what the palate's like. Mouthfully, chewy, unctuous. It kicks off again with quite a lot of vanilla. Feels like possibly first fill American oak there. Then in comes the sort of the grittier French, European, tighter tannins. All the while that sort of vanilla kind of still lingers, and then towards the end you start to get through a little bit of barley, a little bit of citrus, just sort of creeping through all of that oak. Certainly I don't think it's one-dimensional. Again, it's got a lovely progression, it's got a lovely richness to it, you know, so it kind of does what it says on the tin, shall we say. Yes, there's a fair amount of oak and it's got some lovely richness. And it's interesting just to see how the spirit is interacting with these different types of casks. But it finishes again quite dry, quite citric, slightly minerally, and fresh. It's not kind of overwrought, it's not flabby, it's not fat. You know, it's really well balanced, I think, and you know, I think I love that bottle. I mean, that is such a lovely bottle. Anyway, great whiskey. Tell me what you need to live in peace right now. Okay, so let's move on to the Sherrywood. Let's see what the nose gives us on this end, shall we? Again, obvious Sherrywood, but not sort of a huge Oloroso herbal monster. There's obviously raisins, sultana, touch of prune, a little bit of treacle, but I'm still getting green apple, I'm getting barley, I'm getting citrus. That is just, again, really well balanced. It comes across like a refill sherry cask, that is just really well balanced. I'm getting a little bit of dark chocolate, a little bit more prune, some hazelnut, bit of walnut maybe as well. I mean, that's actually got a lovely complexity. There's also a little bit of dry spice as well. Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, if you love sherry matured whiskies, then I think this is certainly one that I'm quite happy to recommend, because it has balance. It's not just an Oloroso monster. There is other elements at work, and specifically I get elements of the distillery character, which is, you know, always good to see. See what the palate's like. Rich, juicy, mouthfulling, wonderfully soft. No grittiness. Again, really well balanced. It opens up with a little bit with the sherry notes, so you get sort of sultana and raisins, a little bit of prune, touch of walnut, and then in comes the spirit character, and it finishes really quite dry, quite minerally, barleyed, citric, a little bit of green apple again. But it's got a lovely chewy aftertaste as well, quite malty, and just again really well balanced. It's got lovely progression, it's got elegance, it's got balance. I mean, what more do you want from a sherried malt? You know, yeah, some people might think there's not enough sherry there, but for me it's just the right amount. It's all really harmoniously balanced. So another great whiskey, I think. Right, okay, so let's move on to the peated. Let's see what the nose gives us on this end, shall we? Again, wonderfully balanced. Slightly medicinal peat notes, but very, very subtle. I mean, if you were sort of saying this was a peated malt, you'd probably say the peating levels probably come out at around about sort of 15 to 20-ish, that sort of area. It's got a little bit of salt, but again, plenty of distillery character. Barley, green apple, citrus, touch of earth. Lovely balance. I mean, that is just a wonderful malt. Again, it's not kind of overloaded with peat. It's got some lovely balance to it. I wonder if somebody's going to count up how many times I used the word balance in this week's episode, but it is just really well balanced. It is just a lovely whiskey. Let's see what the palate gives us. So it opens up with a little bit more of the American oak, certainly a little bit of creamy oak character, barley, some apples, citrus comes through in the middle, and the peat really doesn't come through until sort of almost on the finish, and it's got quite a sort of a dry but slightly medicinal character, a little bit of earth, a little bit of sweetness as well from the peat and the barley. Quite drying, slightly tannic finish, but you know, again, I think overall the balance is really very, very good. I mean, this peat is just lingering. I mean, I can still taste it. You know, it really does hang around, but it doesn't overwhelm the palate, and that is, again, I think the key to the great things that the distillery are doing, is that their whiskies are just so well balanced. Even the Madeira finish, which is a finish rather than a vatting, still displays that sort of great balance. And I think, you know, I think maybe quite a number of customers have kind of forgotten about these whiskies. They've kind of, you know, tasted them, gone off, tasted other sort of things, and you know, I think it's time to reacquaint yourself with a bit of Welsh, shall we say?
Everybody.
Right, okay, and so we're on to the final bottling of this afternoon, the Royal Welsh Whisky. So, like I said, it's a vatting of their peated and their portwood. So let's see what that gives us. It feels bigger. It kind of like, it's sort of, yeah, I can get the peat, I can get but it's got a real estery character. It's got a real fruitiness. It's kind of, and I'm not getting a huge amount of portwood, it has to be said. There's a sort of a background of kind of slightly dried fruit, but there's a real estery nose, and it's really fruity. I mean, certainly not a lot of portwood here at all. I would be surprised if it made up more than, say, 20% of the vatting, because it's really subtle. But it's got a lovely juiciness, a sweetness. The distillery character is really juicy and fruity. It's more so than the Madeira finish. But it's got that lightness to it as well. Again, the green apple note is noticeable, the citrus is noticeable. The peat is very subtle. Certainly doesn't come across as strongly as it does in the peated bottling. And it doesn't quite have the medicinal notes. It's got a little bit more of a savouriness, I suppose. There's a little bit of malt biscuits, which is obviously a kind of a nod towards a sort of like, maybe there's a slightly youthful element to this whisky, but that is really complex. I think the retail is around about sort of the £45 mark, and you know what, I like this. I think this is really impressive. And it's just got a lovely sweetness to it, but it's just, again, just really well balanced. I'm getting the sweetness, the peat, a little bit of dried fruit. Yeah, that is a damn good whisky, I should say. Let's see what it smells like. There's a little bit more portiness on the palate. Kind of opens up with that sort of dried red black fruit, but that kind of dissipates quite quickly, and you're into the sort of the green apple, the barley kind of notes on the middle, a little bit of citrus as well, and the peat kind of comes through towards the end, but it's very subtle and a little drier and less medicinal than the peated bottling. Again, really quite fruity, chewy, but it's just so nicely balanced. This is a lovely whisky, it has to be said at the end of the day. It's got a nice fade to it as well. Kind of, the peat kind of sort of gets a little bit smoky, a little bit, I was going to say mystical, but that, you know what I mean. It's getting a little bit sort of vapoury towards the tail end of the aftertaste, and again, that is just a lovely whisky, and I'm really impressed with that, it has to be said.
Tell me what you need to live in peace right now.
Right, okay, so let's sum today's episode of the show. Like I said, again, a big thank you to the distillery for their amazing generosity, and don't know whether that's just because they're incredibly generous or because they're incredibly generous to me. I don't know. Like I said, we're like that, you know, me and the distillery. But you know, I think the key word with the whiskey that the Penderyn distillery are producing is balance. I mean, it is absolutely spot on, and it really does tick all my boxes. The Madeira finish, it's been a while since I've tasted that in actual fact, and like I said when I tasted it, I think the spirit is a little bit older now, and all the better for it. I think it's lost that sort of, you know, slightly austere kind of youthful character that it used to have, and it's wonderfully round and mature, well, in relative terms, shall we say. But again, the balance is really very, very good. The Madeira adding that kind of biscuity kind of note. The rich oak, well, like I said, it does exactly what it says on the tin. It's richly oaked, but again, it's not overly oaked. It is just really well balanced and very, very impressive. And the same can be said for the Sherrywood. Again, it's not Oloroso monster. It has Oloroso character, so it kind of, you know, appeals to all of you sherry loving people out there. But it's got that elegance to it. It's got also got the distillery character and, you know, balance. All right, it's balanced, people. You know. And the same can be said for the peated. It's not a peat monster. It's not sort of overwhelming peat character. It's all quite, you know, balanced. I'll find another word for balanced. I swear to God. But it is just a lovely whiskey, and the Welsh, the Royal Welsh. Again, I mean, like I said, I don't know how close in characteristic that is to the original bottling. I doubt very much. Well, I don't know, they may well have used some export casks. I mean, you know, we are talking sort of turn of the century sort of distillery, and like all the Scottish distilleries, they would have basically sort of grabbed whatever casks they could get their hands on, and as we well know, sort of, you know, they would use, you know, the early landed cognacs and port and cognac and, well, I just said cognac, haven't I? Sherry and all that kind of stuff. So they would have probably just got their hands on whatever they could get their hands on, I imagine. But this particular bottling is absolutely lovely. Really, really nice, really interesting, and a little bit different. You know, not too much port character, enough port character. Just to sort of give it that sort of slightly interesting sort of dimension, and like I said, I think you know, the blender, the master blender at the distillery is doing just an absolutely spot on job, and damn good. That's all I can say. So all that's left to say is I hope you've enjoyed this week's episode of the show. I hope you've enjoyed a little bit of an insight into my own personal history. You won't get that one too often, I can tell you that for a start. But anyway, all that's left to say is good afternoon and good dramming.